Hello, everybody, and welcome to Time Together, our Thursday weekly watch talk. Want to welcome everybody tonight to witness our little presentation about Grand Seiko. We are very fortunate to have, in my opinion, the foremost expert on the topic with us tonight. He will be giving us a nice little history on the brand and some new product information, and then also some available pieces. And then at the end of everything, those of you that are joining via our Zoom platform, we will invite you in to have a nice conversation. Those on Facebook Live can find that on our website at jbhudson.com under the events tab. We will be able to go from there. At this time, I'd like to invite in Joe Kirk from Grand Seiko and welcome him. And
thank you, Dave.
From there. Hi, Joe.
How's it going? Excited to be here. Thank you for having me, of course.
Glad to.
So cool. Well, should we get started?
I think so. Let's go.
All right. So today, for kind of a quick overview of Grand Seiko for you, we'll give you a little bit on the history and the craftsmanship and the technology that's used in the brand, kind of some of the DNA of Grand Seiko, what makes it Grand Seiko, right? So first and foremost, you kind of need to know the roots of Grand Seiko. Obviously born from Seiko, or Seikosha. It was actually the name of the factory. But Grand Seiko was born in 1960 to be the pinnacle product that was ever made by the Seikosha factory. And so in 1960, launched the very first Grand Seiko. It was made to be the most accurate, the most legible, the most durable, and most comfortable and beautiful watch that the factory possibly could. And from there, set a new standard moving forward. And Grand Seiko was always now the pinnacle of anything produced by the Seikosha factories back in the 1960s. So we introduced the first. It was a chronometer, meaning it met the international standard of the highest grade of watch at the time, right? The highest accuracy, the highest performance. And Grand Seiko was the first to meet this international standard in Japan. The DNA of our watches from the past still lives today. And I'm sure if you visited JB Hudson, you've seen this model, SPGM 221, one of our most popular models, actually, probably within the top two, directly actually influenced from the very first Grand Seiko from 1960. So very thin lugs, a box-shaped sapphire crystal, which gives it this really vintage look, and the rounded case design, kind of the more classic case design. From there, we introduced the second Grand Seiko, which we added a date feature, so we called it the self-dater. This was in 1964, and the same model was made for a few years, but by 1966, we removed the term chronometer from Grand Seiko. And the reasoning behind that is we introduced and developed a new test that was to exceed that of chronometer standard. So we developed a new in-house testing standard. We very practically called the Grand Seiko standard, right? It's a very easy name to remember. So this is our accuracy test. This is what all Grand Seiko watches have to go through, meaning that all Grand Seiko watches are going through a test that is more strict and stringent than you would find for chronometer certification, right? So the accuracy is higher. By today's standard, is a number of different degrees more difficult than chronometer certification. Now, on the second Grand Seiko was when we first implemented what's called Zaratsu polishing. So if you're familiar with Grand Seiko, I'm sure you've heard the term Zaratsu, and this refers to our perfect distortion-free mirror finishing. So this is a technique, and actually the name derived from the machine that was used. But now Zaratsu has so much more to it than just the type of machine or the type of polishing wheel that we're using. But Zaratsu is referring to this very crisp mirror surface that you find on all Grand Seiko watches. And that was first implemented on the 1964 self-dater model. But became most famous in the introduction of the 44GS, which was 1967. The 44GS is the watch that set the standard for Grand Seiko design moving forward. So there's always influence in DNA from our past, even present today. And the 44GS really is what created the beauty aspect of Grand Seiko. And it was really, truly based on a Japanese aesthetic, utilizing very flat surfaces and sharp angles to have this beautiful interplay of light and shadow. And one of the best features was the Zaratsu polishing. You have this distortion-free mirror finish, really has an amazing interaction with light and shadow, especially when you apply it to all these different angles. So we call this also the Grand Seiko grammar of design. So today, the 44GS has been reinterpreted, and while the case size is a little larger and a little bit thicker, the case is just as complex and very difficult actually to create. So the Zaratsu polishing, because of all the flat surfaces and sharp angles, creates complexity in crafting this piece, but also at the same time creates one of the most distinct and iconic case designs in all of Grand Seiko. And this model, for your reference, is SBGJ 201. So another model from 1967 that still has influence today is the 62GS, which was the very first automatic Grand Seiko. Right, so this was not manual winding; it was only self-winding, and was thicker than most Grand Seiko watches of the time. So in order to make this watch feel thinner and reduce the overall thickness, we eliminated the bezel. So it's another part of the case that's disappearing. So it's just the case back, the case, and then the crystal. So there's no bezel on this model, just to help in its appearance in reducing the thickness. Today, we have recreated this in a U.S. exclusive series, which is the 24 Seki or the Japan Season Special Editions. So this comes in 4 different styles. This is one of the 4 different models that represent 4 different seasons. Actually, it's a representation of the micro seasons in Japan, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later on. So the brand values of Grand Seiko, very simple, right? I already mentioned most of them. Precision is number 1, right? We want to make some of the most accurate watches in the world, and we do. Legibility is number 2. If you have a precise watch, you should be able to very clearly read it. So legibility is, of course, a very important factor for Grand Seiko. Durability, you cannot have a precise watch without having a durable watch. So durability, of course, is an important factor as well. And then beauty. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, let's say. But with Grand Seiko, it's really a focus on the Japanese sense of beauty, right? That Japanese aesthetic I was mentioning that we brought forth in the 44GS. So in terms of precision, we make 3 different movement types, right? And we have traditional mechanical movement. We actually make 2 different variants. We make 8 beats per second, or 28,800 beats per hour. And we also make a high beat, which is 36,000 beats per hour. So these are both a part of our 9S mechanical series, and both go through that very strict testing, comparing to chronometer, but a higher degree of accuracy, -3 to +5 seconds per day versus -4 to +6 seconds per day. There's also an additional position, so 6 positions instead of 5, which makes it, the 17-day test instead of 15. There's a lot of different factors that come into play, so it's not just the accuracy, it's all the different elements of the test coming together to create a very challenging test. And the overall accuracy, the average daily accuracy, is going to, of course, be improved upon based on this testing criteria. For quartz, most people kind of shrug off quartz. Quartz is always going to be more accurate than vast majority of the mechanical watches in the world. And, many quartz movements are made by machine, and they're made of plastic, and they're not really exciting. Grand Seiko quartz is, of course, quite the opposite. Right? It's made of metal. It's built for longevity, just like a mechanical watch, right? Made to be serviced, not discarded. And it's got ultra high precision. So 10 seconds per year is the accuracy of the 9F quartz, where most quartz movements are accurate within 15 seconds per month. So it's a significant difference in terms of overall accuracy. And then we have spring drive. Spring drive is kind of like the best of both worlds. It is vast majority mechanical, same operation as you would see in, let's say, the 9S mechanical. It differs in the escapement only. And the escapement is kind of a hybrid mechanism. It uses the mechanical energy to generate a little bit of electricity so it can get the accuracy of a quartz crystal, but then it uses an electromagnetic braking system to slow the speed and keep time. So it's a very unusual approach and unique approach in watchmaking. We are the only ones who have spring drive, right? There's no other company, no other brand in the world that is selling something similar to spring drive. It's its own movement type and unique to our brand. So spring drive achieves plus or minus 15 seconds per month, equivalent to 1 second per day, less than 1 second per day accuracy. It's the most accurate that you'll find in a self-winding or a manual winding movement on the market today. So when you're looking at all three of these different movement types, it's like, where do you start with Grand Seiko? What's the best thing to buy first? And really, I mean, it's ultimately up to you. That's a very challenging question to answer, but I try and break it down very simply. Right, spring drive is probably the most popular. David, you can probably attest to that. I would say that most people are driven towards spring drive first. Nope, you're still on mute.
That's definitely what they come in and asking for. They look at the uniqueness of it and the fact that they can't get it from any other brand as the drawing port. And from there, they do kind of aesthetically choose things based on, what appeals to them even more. So you're right. It is a tough decision for a lot of people, including us in the business too. We have to see which one.
That's why we got to go for all of them.
Right. That's a good point.
But when you're considering, I always say spring drive is complete innovation. So if that's what you're looking for, innovation is key in many different ways. And not that any of our other movements are not innovative, but spring drive is completely unique. So that's a great factor to consider. But then when you look at, especially the high beat is also quite unique. Now, there are only a few other companies that can make a high beat movement as an example. But mechanical watches in general are really about tradition. And so spring drive is really innovative and has some very modern aspects to it, where the mechanical movements have their own kind of charm, right? It's there's no need for any kind of electronics in it whatsoever. Even though spring drive is self-sustaining, there are a couple of electronic components, and this is all done with springs, gears solely. So mechanical has that element, and these are all hand adjusted, right? The hairspring, which is a very delicate little spring, is adjusted by hand to the nearest hundredth of a millimeter. And that's all done with like a special set of tweezers. And this is an art form that's been handed down from generation to generation of Grand Seiko watchmaker. This is a skill set that has to be taught. It's not necessarily, you can be a natural, but to only a certain extent, let's say. So this is all about tradition. And then when you look at quartz is so convenient, right? It's very easy to use. That's the more defining trait, I would say. Battery lasts for 3 years. It's not a power reserve of 3 days. The accuracy is within seconds per year. Sometimes it's even 5 seconds per year, depending on the model. So we make some limited editions that are 5 seconds per year instead of 10. And it has very high longevity. So there's very little fuss to deal with when it comes to the quartz. It's always ready to go. So they each have their strong suit. Legibility, of course, is very important as well. As I mentioned, you'll notice all Grand Seiko have these Dauphine style hands with a lot of facets, a lot of really sharp angles on the outer edges. Look like they could cut you, and they most certainly can. These facets on every single edge of every Grand Seiko hand and marker are in order to increase visibility. So those perfectly mirror polished edges are to capture little glimmers of light and kind of roll them across the hand, which increases the visibility also in low light settings. So if there's very little light, you can still read Grand Seiko easily. But we do other approaches too. The flat top surface is finished differently depending on the dial color. So whatever provides the most contrast, right? If it's a dark dial, you'll typically see this, what we call hairline finishing on the top surface. It captures light and makes the hands look brighter, where mirror polishing tends to capture black and make the hands look darker. So on a white dial, like the snowflake, it's much higher contrast and much easier to read. So this is why we do these different approaches. And with all these different bevels and angles, this is always providing contrast on this angled outer edge. So on one side you have light, on one side you have shadow. It doesn't matter if there's a light dial or a dark dial. These angled edges also help create kind of a distinct line on either side, whatever is easier for you to read, right? And then when you see our hands, you know, our second hands especially are all three-dimensional. There's always like a little bead of light at the end of them. But when you see a blue one, this is all done by hand. This is where the craftsmanship comes in, right? One by one, they heat these second hands up until they reach the perfect shade of blue. So it changes from silver to the perfect shade of blue. And this is all done individually. Most tempered hands are done in batches. So we have one of the most expensive second hands, let's say, in the watch industry when it's one of these blued ones, because they're, you know, done one by one. And the beauty aspect of Grand Seiko, right? It's all about that Japanese aesthetic, like I mentioned before. And it's about creating an interplay of light and shadow, dramatic contrast. It doesn't matter if it's the hands, the markers, the case itself actually needs to have that high contrast too. It's not just for the legibility, but we do beautiful finishing to increase the visibility. But on top of that, we do it to the case more purely for the aesthetic factor. So we talked about Zaratsu polishing, and this is it. All right, we have a video of one of the very few craftsmen at our spring drive manufacturer who is hand Zaratsu polishing the case. All Zaratsu polishing is done by hand up against a metal wheel with an abrasive on the front surface. Now this is a hard surface, and they're basically grinding the metal. In this case, it's a rose gold case, but steel or titanium alloy, rose gold and platinum, we have different applications of Zaratsu polishing for each. So Zaratsu, we have numerous steps, right? It's a 4-step process to just start with Zaratsu. And from there, we can continue to elaborate. But, you know, in reality, every case has to be Zaratsu polished first with the 4 steps that I was just mentioning. And then we can go and we can apply the brushed, or again, the hairline finishing that we do in Grand Seiko, which is also done by hand. So in this instance, you're seeing it applied with a very small abrasive brush. But we also, if it's a wider surface, we can use an abrasive strip or a wheel. So this is all done by hand, though, which is pretty remarkable, especially when you consider the price range of Grand Seiko. You're talking anywhere from, you know, I mean, sky's the limit, but starting $2,200, our average price is around $6,300. This is a lot of handwork, hand craftsmanship in that price range.
And that's the neat thing, is that they provide you with many options, and you don't have to buy the highest priced item in order to get the Zaratsu polishing. You know, they have Zaratsu even at some of the entry level pieces, which is just amazing to me as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, really, it varies depending on the case complexity. You know, in a lot of instances, you see like the 44 GS case I was talking about earlier is very, very flat, and there's a lot of really sharp edges. And so Zaratsu is great for retaining these very sharp edges and creating these very flat surfaces, but only if you're really talented at doing it. It's a give and take, right? So the 44 GS has these iconic, really broad lugs that are perfectly mirror polished, and you can see a perfect reflection in those. On the snowflake case, as an example, you have these really flat edges, but on the lug, it's a little bit thinner and it's more dramatically curved as opposed to being flat. And you wouldn't get the same effect with Zaratsu on this curved surface normally. So they do the hairline finishing here. But over the years, we've always strived to improve, right? That's the goal of Grand Seiko, is to continuously elevate ourselves in terms of what we're doing. We want to take everything to the next level. All things take time, of course. But last year in 2019, we introduced a brand new series for our elegance collection, our dress watches. And a lot of people don't realize that this new thinner case design is more dress watch is the target, but you can really still wear it with anything. These really curved lugs have Zaratsu polishing with the mirror finishing, but now we can do it where you have the same effect as if it was a flat surface. So this is a new Zaratsu polishing technique that is applied to these case designs specifically, and really labor intensive to do. So you'll notice that the pricing is a little bit higher, comparatively speaking. One reason is because of the case. Still a lot of really sharp edges, but the rounded surface with the new Zaratsu polishing, and also this crystal actually is very. It's almost like a drop of water sitting on the dial type of crystal that, in this particular instance, is distortion free. So the sapphire crystal itself is something brand new as well. And a lot of people talk about Grand Seiko dials. I don't blame them, but the snowflake is the most talked about, right? This is what most people, when they come to see Grand Seiko, this is probably the first model that they're going to want to look at, because everyone hears about it and wants to know more about it and see it in person. The snowflake is a tribute to where they make spring drive, right? It's a tribute to their hometown's winters. And the dial is supposed to look like the snowfall after it's been carved out by the wind in the Shinshu region of Japan. The blue accents are to give it the cold feeling of winter, and the titanium alloy for the case and bracelet is to give it that light as a snowflake type feeling. So all of these elements kind of culminate together to create a tribute to Shinshu. And I mean, realistically, that's why I bought one. So I think that there's other people like me out there who appreciate that kind of connection to Japan and the hometown of spring drive and nature and all these, kind of wonderful things. Not a lot of people know the history of how we created the snowflake dial. So if you look back in our records, in 1971, we came out with a model of 56 GS in 18 karat gold with a hammered case and this really beautiful textured dial. So when they were coming up with the concept of how are we going to make this snow texture for the dial of this Grand Seiko, this is where they looked. So obviously you can't use the same dial in this instance. It's a Tonneau shaped case. There's a lot of differences in how we're manufacturing today, let's say, but in reality, this is where we looked for achieving the same type of texture. When you look at the dial process, sometimes we'll come out and we'll do events and we'll bring this little diagram of how the snowflake dial is made, and it shows you these 8 different stages of the dial in its production. And a lot of people don't realize the snowflake dial is made of brass, but that's the base material for it. And then we create the texture by applying tons of pressure, right? A couple hundred tons of pressure are applied to create this very fine pattern that's only about a 0.04 millimeter difference in height from the lowest point to the highest point of the dial. It's very, very, very fine texture. And then from there, the cutting and clear coating and all these other steps. Interesting points that I should mention is the white dial of the snowflake is actually not a paint or anything. It's actually silver plating, a special silver plating process, electroplating. And it took us a lot of trial and error to develop that. Also, the markers that are so perfectly polished are all applied to the dial by hand as well, and they're attached in 2 different processes, both adhesive and of 2 pegs that are essentially applied with pressure to attach to the dial. So there's a lot of steps involved that you don't see necessarily, and a lot of hard work that goes into these. When you look at the actual snowflake dial making process, there's actually over 80 individual steps required just to make the snowflake dial. And that's not even our most complex dial in the lineup. So it gives you an idea of the work that goes into it. So this texture is not the only dial to have this complex process. It's also found in our high beat GMT with our Mount Iwate dial. It's supposed to be the ridges of Mount Iwate expressed in the dial. And this is what I'm wearing today, just the black dial version. SBGJ 201 is what you see on the screen. 203 is the black dial with the red GMT hand that I'm wearing personally. And I absolutely love that watch. So, and it's got the 44GS case design. And so we have our big anniversary this year, the 60th anniversary, 60th birthday of Grand Seiko. And in Japan, you know, the 60th birthday is very significant because you've completed a full cycle of the zodiac, of the traditional zodiac. And this completion, this 60-year cycle, is a symbol of new birth, right? So your 60th birthday, you're celebrating this new life that you're this new birth that you've had, and that's what this year is all about for Grand Seiko. So we have this new lineup with blue Grand Seiko Indigo Blue, which is derives from an indigo dyeing process in Japan, very labor-intensive work that very deep roots in Japanese culture. And then the red accents, red is the symbol of birth, or in this instance, rebirth. So that's why you're going to see a lot of this Grand Seiko blue combined with red this year for the 60th anniversary of Grand Seiko. So we have a high beat with the 44GS case design. We have new quartz with a 2020 pattern dial, also made by Press Patterning, like you saw for the Snowflake. This one is going to have a little 5-pointed star at 6 o'clock, which means it has 5 seconds per year accuracy, as opposed to the normal 10 seconds per year. And then coming soon, Dave, you'll be receiving these soon, is a new sports design for Grand Seiko called the Tough Quartz, kind of nicknamed the Tough Quartz. And this particular version is the first to feature a zirconia ceramic bezel. So this is going to be reaching the store soon. And this model in particular has been very, very popular. So I'm excited to see it. I actually have one of the old Tough Quartz in my collection as well, one of the previous generation. So I'm a little jealous of the new one. And we also did a ladies model to celebrate our 60th anniversary. Being 60th anniversary being the diamond anniversary, we did diamond bezel, diamond markers, and of course the Grand Seiko shade of blue, but in mother of pearl. So the two quartz models also feature an upgraded version of the 9F caliber. So same great 9F that we've had since basically 1993 when it was launched. However, we've added an independent hour adjust feature. So you can jump the hour hand without stopping the time because it's so accurate. Why would you want to stop it, right? So now you can change for daylight savings, or if you're changing time zones, and you don't like a GMT, let's say there's too many hands, you can do it on our quartz now, where you jump the hour hand without stopping the time, which is a great new feature. And this is really what this new birth, this rebirth, or this new horizon for Grand Seiko is all about this year, is the introduction of 2 new revolutionary calibers. Today, I'm really going to focus on just one, but I'm going to introduce you to both right now. We've just launched a new high beat caliber with a very new innovative escapement, unlike anything in the industry today, and a long power reserve of 80 hours. Today, what I'm going to feature is going to be our new spring drive caliber, because spring drive is one of the most popular movements out there for us. We have taken this amazing movement and we have exceeded it in every single way, shape, and form possible. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm going to just kind of briefly give you a glimpse into what makes this new caliber so awesome. You'll notice we're featuring it in this professional dive watch, right? 600-meter diver. We've taken the spring drive caliber and we've made it almost a millimeter thinner, 0.8 millimeters thinner. And that means it's 5 millimeters overall in thickness, just the movement. But we put it in this robust dive watch. Typically when the movement gets thinner, you're sacrificing the rigidity or the durability, right? The shock resistance. Not with this particular movement. So this is one of the reasons we're showcasing it in a professional diver to start, is because we've developed this new movement with durability in mind. And keep in mind, all Grand Seikos, durability is a big factor in the movement design as well. So this is, but this is exceptional to reduce the thickness and to make it stronger, let's say. So this new movement was designed by Eiichi Hiraya, and Eiichi Hiraya is same movement designer that worked on, let's say, the 9R86 spring drive chronograph GMT, as an example, was involved in spring drive development, and now had this big challenge on his hands to how are we going to improve spring drive, right? It's already the world's most accurate manual winding or self-winding movement. How are we going to make it better? And his goal was to hit basically every way possible, right? Make it longer power reserve, make it more accurate, make it more beautiful. And on top of all that, we're going to make it thinner. Doesn't sound easy. I'm not jealous of the work he had to put into it. So one of the things that he did, the magic lever is our self-winding mechanism we use in spring drive. It's been around in Seiko actually developed in 1959, the magic lever. And seen it in other brands, the same concept. They've used it in a lot of different products across Seiko and both Grand Seiko as well over the years. And so the system is great. It's super efficient. It's fewer parts than a conventional reverse gear self-winding system. And it's just better. It's more efficient. It works faster. It winds up faster. The problem is it adds a little bit of height and also a little bit of width. But in this particular instance, we're more focused on the height. So we were able to actually develop this where it doesn't need to be directly under the rotor. And this particular instance, we can off-center it without sacrificing the efficiency of it. So that all comes from a new system, a new manufacturing technique that allows us to create this staff that runs through the center that's pivoted in the middle. So this is a big breakthrough in manufacturing technique that allowed us to come up with this new system. And we added 2 barrels to spring drive. So this is not necessarily, let's say, unique in the industry, but the size and the shape of them are. And for this new spring drive movement, we incorporate dual size barrels. So one's small, one's big. And we chose this method to increase the duration based on the fact that if we had 2 barrels that were the same size, there would be a lot of dead space in between that we couldn't put any components. So spring drive is component heavy, right? There's a lot of additional components in spring drive comparing to most automatics, let's say. And by doing this dual size barrel, we can actually fit more in this space right here. And mainly the magic lever that you just saw, this new innovative magic lever. Also, we've increased the power reserve, right? But we've also made it more accurate. And this is all through the regulating mechanism. The tri-synchro regulator uses an integrated circuit in the quartz crystal to develop that sense of accuracy, right? And in this instance, we developed a new spring drive package integrated circuit that combines both the IC and the quartz crystal in one chip, essentially. And it also provides an additional feature of temperature compensation. So it corrects for temperature. And we use similar technology in our 9F quartz, but it's far more power consuming, right? And this is, this is why we use it in a battery driven watch. In spring drive, it has to be ultra low power. So we can't get 10 seconds per year accuracy, but we can increase from 15 seconds per month to 10 seconds per month. So the accuracy is higher on this new caliber and consistently. So this is a big breakthrough and still ultra low power. And here's kind of one of the first glimpses at this new integrated circuit inside the spring drive caliber. So this is actually a live shot. What's interesting too, in the last generations of spring drive, you've never been able to see the integrated circuit before. So, and this is true with our quartz that have an open case back. They're sensitive to UV rays. So this is something that it's just not allowed to occur in spring drive. So now I apologize if you hear a screaming child in the background. That's on me. There's nothing I can do. It's just still working from home here. But the whole point I was talking about before with us introducing this in a dive watch, the durability, right? When you make a thinner movement, typically you have a sacrifice in its overall robustness. And because of this new one-piece center bridge, we're actually able to increase the durability and increase the energy efficiency, all in a smaller package. So this is a new development, a new introduction, this new complex bridge that we have to make. But this is the reason why we can enhance that that rigidity to be ISO standard for a dive watch, for a professional grade dive watch at that, 600 meters. So it's thinner, yet more durable. And we've also increased the beauty. So it's now featuring a new finishing technique that emulates what they call the hoarfrost or rime. It was frost, basically a fine frost that grows on trees in very, very cold temperatures as it gets in Shinshu and in central Japan where they make spring drive. So the frosted finish is a new application. And then we also have the jewels and the blued screws to kind of emulate the starry night sky in Shinshu. So another aspect of this new movement is there's a new finishing technique for the beveling. So in most instances, diamond cut finishing can only be done at a 45-degree angle for the beveling, unless you do it by hand like we do in our micro artist studio. And those watches cost, $40,000-$50,000 starting. So in this particular instance, we've developed a new manufacturing or a new finishing, I should say, technique that allows us to diamond cut these edges in a convex or a rounded shape, which is totally new to the industry and very groundbreaking and innovative. And on top of that, it's still an attainable price point. You're not talking 40, 50K. So this particular model is going to be 11,100. So you're getting a lot of quality for the money. And I always love to mention too, you'll notice that even though this is a 600-meter diver, there's no helium release valve on this particular model or any Grand Seiko, with the 600-meter water resistance that's as high as they go right now. This is because of a special case design that allows us to prevent any air or gas from getting in, so it doesn't need to escape. And of course, it's got the Grand Seiko blue and red color combo for the 60th anniversary. And you'll notice the power reserve is in the 10 o'clock position, and it's got 5 chapters. So your 5-day power reserve is expressed right there on the dial. Now, the watch is large. It's a professional grade diver, and it's the sapphire crystal in it. It has to be 6-7 millimeters in overall thickness. So the watch itself is probably it's right at 16 millimeters in overall thickness, 47 millimeters almost wide. And this is a 7-inch wrist. This is my wrist actually, and because of the short lug-to-lug length, it's very wearable. And the 4 o'clock crown also contributes a lot to that as well. But it's a big watch. I mean, it's built with purpose. It's a very rugged dive watch for professional divers. We realize, not everyone necessarily is going to take it in the water. Maybe they'll take it in the pool. But at the same time, it's built with the purpose, and that purpose is there, and it's fully functional. So it can withstand everything you throw at it. And, considering all that it has, it's actually not a bad size. And also the 47 millimeters wide is really where it touches your wrist, and it kind of tapers up like a volcano almost. So a little bit less in terms of the overall width. So I'm sure everyone has seen our seasons, our 24 Seki or Japan Seasons collection and our 62 GS case design. You may have heard we just last week, we announced the latest addition to our Japan Seasons collection. So in this instance, before we did 4 models that were exclusive, let's say, to each season that we know, right? They're based on micro seasons. So each season that we know, spring, summer, fall, winter, each have micro seasons within them, right? 6 micro seasons within them, for at least in Japan, right? So for this particular design, we had one expression for every of the 4 seasons. This time we're choosing the first frost, which is basically at the beginning or at the end of, let's say, autumn. Right at the beginning of November, end of October is the time frame that Soko occurs, and is represented by the first frost that it would occur in Arashiyama bamboo forest in Kyoto. And this is one of their most popular times of year. One of the most crowded at Arashiyama bamboo forest is during Soko, the about 2-week span that that occurs at this time of year. So this is the inspiration behind it. You can see the fine lines of the dial are to represent the many stalks of bamboo, as you would see at Arashiyama Forest, and the green accents, obviously, to pay tribute to the many shades of green you'll see as well. So we did 2 for the same micro season. We have the silver dial, which is SPGA 427 expressing light, and SPGA 429 expressing shadow with a dark gray. So these 2 new models will be available beginning of July. So they'll be on their way to us soon. All right. So at this point, we'll open up for Q&A.
And we had
Thank you.
questions throughout. If I can just throw them at you, Joe, we'll try to do it this way.
Yeah, of course.
First one was a question about the service interval of the spring drive.
Yeah.
Seiko's interval that they recommend is 3 to 4 years. Is that consistent with spring drive, or is there a longer service interval?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at any of our instruction booklets, let's say, you're going to look and you're going to see anywhere from a 3 to 5 year range in recommended service and inspection period. Right. And there's 2 main reasons I want to remind people why they should do this. One is lubricant has a lifespan. Right? Lubricant changes viscosity at least after about 5 years. So you should always have that checked, see how it's operating, cleaned, relubricated, stuff like that is healthy for the watch. Are you going to need to? Not necessarily. And the lubricants, we know from any, a lot of vintage watches and our own collecting experience that many of these watches that should have the lubrication changed every 5 years, they can run many more years. They don't need to. But it may affect the performance. So that's why they put it in the instruction booklet, is because it may impact the accuracy. Because if the lubricant gets a little thicker, maybe harder to drive the wheels, there may be some impact on performance. So that's one aspect, right? The lubrication. Number 2 reason is the gaskets, the seal. Those gaskets, especially if you like to shower, like a hot shower or go into a sauna with your watch, and it's exposed to all this water vapor that's trying to get into the case, but is getting stopped by that gasket that's in there. As soon as, that gasket getting humid and then drying out and getting humid and then drying out, eventually it's going to crack. So you need to have those gaskets at least inspected every few years. That's really what it boils down to. In terms of spring drive or really any of the Grand Seiko calibers, is it going to be required that you do that? No, I wouldn't anticipate that would ever necessarily be the instance where the watch after 3 to 5 years is just going to suddenly stop. Spring drive in particular, right? There's no collision in the escapement. There's no friction. There's no sliding friction like you would find in a lever escapement, and everything is unidirectional and smooth. So in reality, the longevity, just based on that fact alone, is much higher than a traditional mechanical movement. But because every wheel, the pivot that goes into the jewel requires lubrication, it's important to make sure it's healthy. So in theory, you could go much longer with spring drive. Quartz, obviously, too. Our quartz has a sealed off cabin that prevents any dust or any contaminants from getting into the gear train when you change the battery. It's a really brilliant design and enhances the longevity substantially. The mechanical side of things, every single one of our mechanical movements has an escape wheel right? And that's the one that's going through the most wear and tear, constantly colliding with the pallet stones. Each single tooth in the escape wheel has a little lubricant retention at the very end. So it's got a little step, this micro manufacturing technique that we use called MEMS. This allows us for that. And then we do other things to prevent the high wear and tear, like polishing pinions, right? We polish every single tooth. Every single pinion leaf is polished to be smooth, reduces friction, and increases longevity. So, and various plating treatments, heating treatments. In reality, can you go much longer? Yes, but are we gonna recommend it in the book? Probably not. So I hope that helps. Long-winded answer.
I think it does. And then here's one for you with the new 9R A5 movement, the new 5-day spring drive.
Yeah.
The length of time that it takes to make that single layer bridge, is that something how many steps are involved or the length of time for that?
Not yet. Unfortunately, because of the situation in the world, but prior to the launch in March, I was going to be visiting the factory to kind of meet with the people behind the development of these movements. And we've been doing a lot through virtual exchange, but nothing really beats kind of being at the factory and seeing it firsthand. So that in particular instance, no, I know some of the techniques that are applied in manufacturing that one-piece bridge that makes it challenging, because you have to make, how do I explain this easily? It's, you have a lot of little grooves being cut into a pretty thin piece of metal. And like, comparatively speaking, this is not a thin piece of metal, right? When you compare it to bridges in a lot of other movements out there, it's relatively thick, but like I said, the movement thickness overall has to be under 5. So you have to delicately kind of know those things, and it makes it a challenging process. And so because it's covering so many different components, it's also more complex in that regard. So you have to, kind of cut grooves for more parts as well. So hope that helps explain the difficulty a little bit.
I think it does.
Cool.
And that took care of the couple questions we had on the chat portion of everything. We want to take a moment as JB Hudson to thank Joe Kirk for coming along for the ride tonight. Those of you that are in our Zoom functionality, we will invite you in as panelists so that you can come in and enable your video and see us all and talk to us if you care to. Those of you on Facebook Live, we really appreciate you joining, and make sure to like it and share with a friend or two so that they can get the knowledge about Grand Seiko that we've been given tonight. So Joe, thanks again.
Oh, my pleasure.
For everyone else,
Appreciate you having me.
Oh, absolutely. We look forward to seeing you again next week.